Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Way to ATO. I've heard so many complaints. I'm just going to launch. I'm just going to go into this. So I've heard so many complaints about the authority to operate that I decided to reach out and invite some experts, some Sherpas for us. But anyways, my name's Ellen Chang. Work with BMNT, also work with our accelerator, HRX Labs. And part of the inspiration for this panel was because we do have a set of startups with us who are looking they're developing systems that are information technology oriented, and they want to work with the DoD. And I was thinking, well, if they do, they need to actually get on the networks. And oh my gosh, that's the most painful part of it all. So actually, we have two experts with us today who can talk to generally, authority to operate and some of the other cybersecurity requirements. And maybe actually demystify, or perhaps even, demystify some aspects and possibly raise other questions. Because just because you understand and get into DoD doesn't mean you actually can work with the Navy or work with the Air Force or work with any other service that is part of the DoD. And that's part of the confusion. But I'm not going to be leading this conversation. I'm going to have each of these experts introduce themselves. I'll kick off with a couple of questions. But for all of you out there, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. Make this as interactive as possible. Raise your hand if you want to talk. I mean, it's not a huge crowd, so we can be more interactive instead of just a one-to-many webinar. So with that, Mike, let me invite you to introduce yourself, and then Jason, I'll turn it over to you. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, thanks, Ellen. I'm Commander Mike Pyne. I'm a Navy officer currently in human resources. And that's actually what's brought me to the IT space outside of my computer science background before I joined the Navy, where I've been involved heavily in the MyNavy HR kind of digital transformation. So spent a few years there prior to my current duty station, trying to help HR graduate from the COBOL mainframe types of systems onto something cloud-based and a little bit more modern. Ran into a lot of buzzsaws along the way. So I'll explain the ones that I can. But just happy to be here. And I should note, I'm here in my personal capacity. I don't represent the DoD or the Navy or the Department of the Navy or any activity.
Disclaimer. Okay.
Very important.
Hi, I'm Jason Knudson. I also have a Navy background. I spent 20 years in the Navy, both enlisted officer, special warfare, submarines, information warfare, cryptology. I was all over the place. I could never keep a job. But the one thing I ended up sliding into towards the end of my career was the sort of defense innovation stuff. So I was the chief of staff of the Chief of Naval Operations Rapid Innovation Cell, worked several projects there. I was the innovation officer for 7th Fleet. I was a program officer in at the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental in Silicon Valley in the IT and cyber portfolio. And I also touched a lot of different areas. I touched HR for a little bit. I was trying to push things up the hill while Mike was trying to pull them. I worked large scale IT transformation, both at U.S. Transportation Command, bringing together over 200 data streams into a common data lake, and also worked on the Air Force's Enterprise IT as a Service, which as of yesterday just was awarded their scaling and sustainment contract, which is a pretty big deal. That's the communications infrastructure for every single base that the Air Force has. So that's kind of exciting. I retired a couple of years ago and started back into the startup sector. I did a maglev transportation startup, worked at, and more recently, I was the VP of product and strategy at a company called Second Front, which was trying to solve some of the pain points with ATOs and authority to operate. And since then, I've been working and advising different companies and the federal government on how to work in the innovation space and work with startups and work with you. So that's it.
You. Yeah, thanks for that. We have a group online. I think folks come from all walks of life. in terms of the companies that they operate. Certainly they're interested in this topic. So maybe I'll start off with the most basic question. I'd love the answers from both of you. What is authority to operate? Like, why do we call it that? What does it mean? How does, besides just the paperwork process, what goes on to get the authority to operate? What happens? Maybe Mike, I'll start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's a trust decision, which is issued by a competent official who's authorized to make those decisions about whether to put a computer-based information system onto a DoD network, or even to process, in my case, a DoD network, but other federal government agencies, it's very similar. But some form or fashion, someone has to make a conscious decision to say, I trust this information system. I trust this, computer-based, cloud-based capability to handle government workloads. Because I mean, we're talking about real sensitive stuff sometimes. Sometimes it's as simple as a public website, or I'm just going to host a WordPress for my public affairs officer. But it can go all the way up to national security systems, classified systems. It's all the same process, just different parts baked in. And is this system secure enough? Is this system going to be available when it needs to be available? All these things get factored into that. And ultimately, someone makes a decision, signs it out in a document after, like any other government process, you're reviewing a ton of documents, reviewing a ton of work, reviewing a ton of information about whether that makes sense to do. So every agency, every sub-agency even can have different little nuances in the process that are different. So like, you'll hear me talk about Navy versus Air Force, and, Air Force versus other things. We're all following a DoD process, but, sometimes we have little carve outs for Navy, or sometimes we just implement the same process a little bit differently. But at a high level, that's what it is. A lot of information that we have to, compile about an information system, get it to the right person, make them understand your information system and the mission, right? Which is the other factor to be considered here. Then get to a yes or no decision, or get to a maybe, or let's get to a yes for now, but I'm going to put some conditions on it, and let's talk again in a few weeks or a few months. That's my take.
So how before I go to Jason, given your role that you did have in maybe your current role, how many of these decisions have to be made? I guess I don't even know how to bucket it. A week, a month? Like, how many information systems are asking to get on the network at any point in time? Is it hundreds, thousands, millions? Down here.
I'd say probably thousands that have to cycle. Like, there's a 3-year window typically for a normal ATO. So, if you're not 3 years,
3 years to get on the network.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Okay.
You get a paperwork that says go, and that is valid for 3 years.
Okay.
Now, that's not something anyone likes, right? They want to do it more frequently. They want to get to something called continuous monitoring, and continuous ATO, which Jason's probably better to talk about. But outside of continuous, you have discrete points in time. And if you get a discrete point in time ATO, that's going to last you for 3 years. And so you divide your thousands of IT systems by 3, and that's kind of how many you're talking about per year. And it's also interesting to think, kind of what counts as an IT system, for the purposes of the ATO process. Like, if not to throw vendors out there, but like if I get a cloud service provider's service, let's just say S3, and I'm a mission owner and I get S3 approved for my mission, is that good for the whole Navy? The short answer is no. Right. So it's like, even if you reuse S3 in other parts of Navy workloads, those mission owners may have to get S3 looked at again and again and again. And so, there's some built-in parts of the process designed to try to minimize that amount of rework, but it only works up to a point.
Thank you for that. I guess, Jason, continuous ATO, or even just anything that Mike said, we're talking about ATO, authority to operate here, and the volume. I mean, I'm amazed at the volume. So any addition here to help us understand the scope of the work and the challenges?
Yeah, where Commander Pyne kind of represents the DoD perspective and the government perspective, I'll try to represent the startup perspective, and we'll go back and forth debate style. So from a startup perspective, an authority to operate, I completely agree that it is the trust decision that you need to achieve to get onto a federal government system. And so you need to understand first and foremost that this is a human decision, right? At the end of the day, no matter how many checklists you fill out or security controls you put in place, there is a person on the other end who makes that decision and signs off on the bottom line and accepts the risk of having that system on the networks, right? If there's a security violation, if there is a penetration into your system, Chinese, Russian, Iranian actor comes in, or even a criminal activity comes in and hacks in the system via a vulnerability you brought in, it is not always the company's getting yelled at. It's going to be the person who approved that system on the network. And on top of that, the federal government is taking on a lot of money, a monetary aspect of this, because they're going to monitor your system, they're going to protect your system, they're going to operate your system. And so it needs to be sure that when they go to do that, it's doing it in such a way that they can adequately do it and do it safely. The other thing that an ATO is for you is it's your ticket to ride. If you are in the software space and you achieve ATO, and you'll hear ATO or the processes, you'll hear several different terms. ATO, you may have, if you've been here for a while, you may have heard DIACAP, a DIACAP. I'm not going to break out that acronym. That's been replaced by RMF, Risk Management Framework. And then they just call it ATO, and then there's continuous ATO. All of those essentially mean the same thing. There's also FedRAMP.
Yeah, CMC. I'm like, okay.
Yep, FedRAMP. So all of these things are different processes that get you to that decision criteria. I'll pause right there. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So as you move forward, what popped in my mind is, if they're kind of the same thing, why aren't they called the same thing? Is it different people governing or different agencies governing these, especially FedRAMP and CMMC? It seems like there's been quite a bit of writing out there on industry, and you don't know when it's going to be applied or not, because people are pushing back. I believe that's what's happening, is that it wants to come in and people are pushing back. So can you kind of demystify that piece for us? And at what point are people impacted by these different processes? How does one think through, how to move forward, I guess? For you, Jason.
For me,
yeah, because you were just talking about
continuing to go forward. Okay, so first of all, regardless of how you're entering into the government, whether it's a small business innovation research grant, a direct contract, you're subbing on an IDIQ, right? There's a lot of different ways to do business with the government. The primary thing that you need to understand is who is your sponsoring organization and who has the authority to give that ATO. And like Mike has said earlier, there's lots of different organizations, service organizations. Actually, I'll give you some key organizations that you should know about, right? The chief information officers for each one of the services, right? There's also, between the services, you have these systems commands and these program executive offices. They also have authority to allow you to put software onto certain systems, whether they're command and control systems, weapon systems, all of those are governed by slightly different rules. There is a joint agency that governs joint programs, and this is all Department of Defense specific, called DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, which is co-located on Fort Meade with NSA. And one of the key responsibilities NSA has that nobody talks about or even thinks about is they are the executive agent for information assurance for the entire federal, or the entire Department of Defense. On top of that, every other agency that you go to in the federal government, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Treasury, they all have their own approval processes to get systems on the network. So first step is know who owns that approval, that trust decision for your network. The second is identify who's going to sponsor you to that person, right? And so that is going to be the path, is normally having a conversation with very early with your, whoever your defense customer is, the person who is paying for you or the organization, and find out who is going to make that decision at the end. And finally, and ultimately, if you can achieve this before you get a contract, which is actually contract in not only the money to go and get an ATO, but have the contract to tell you which ATO agency is going to support that. That is the gold standard of being able to know who to go to and having the means to go get an ATO. Then all you have to do is the technical stuff. The technical stuff is easy. What did I miss, Mike?
Sounds like.
I just want to hammer again on the part about knowing who your customer is, because the as you can imagine, like it's a laborious process for everyone who goes through it. RMF is the process, ATO is the outcome. Even on the government side, we inflict the same thing on ourselves. And so, like when I was in HR transformation, we had a system I was working with that came to a kind of a cybersecurity decision point, and the answer was no. It actually led to a lot of rework. It led to a lot of delay. But and I just say this because you got to understand the cybersecurity process. However onerous it is, it's applied fairly evenly. And so because there's some onerousness to it, the mission is going to start driving the prioritization with the cybersecurity agencies. Right. If you have something that's absolutely mission critical, like this carrier needs to go underway in 8 months, and we need this system up to have that happen, that's going to be at the top of the cybersecurity team's queue, both from the terms of securing the system and also in terms of reviewing it and approving it. And so, if the person you're trying to sell to is not near the top of that queue and you want to sell in 6 months, you're already kind of looking awkward there. So, know who your customer is, because their mission is going to influence kind of how important your stuff is to the extent that your software, your service that you're selling to the government impacts that mission. So, if you want to get to the head of the line, have a really important mission, have something that's going to solve that really important mission, that kind of thing. Flip side, like if you're selling like a commodity service that has 6 different competitors and they're all equally good, 5 of them already have ATOs. Like, I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. It's just, it's not going to the top of the queue, right? So keep that stuff in mind. And I would also just add one other thing, which is you can get started on stuff before you know who your customer is. And it can be value added to at least, be leaning in the direction of getting an ATO. Because, there's going to be a lot of stuff you have to do as far as like, if you're a cloud offering, you want to get a FedRAMP certification of some sort, at least FedRAMP moderate, probably FedRAMP high if you're trying to sell to DoD. And that stuff you can get started on even before you have a specific customer, because it's all stuff it's the common controls basically, and you get them done for the one federal customer, and they're done for all federal customers. All other federal customers you sell to are going to re-inherit from your FedRAMP certification. So that stuff you can start it on early. Every ATO package is going to be helped by a FedRAMP if you're talking about a cloud service, and so you don't necessarily need to wait to know who your customer is to know that, okay, I should at least get FedRAMP moderate. So it's not necessarily that you have to wait until your customer is identified and then start. In fact, if you do that, you're just setting yourself behind. But yeah, having a good customer is going to help you get that ATO as well.
Sounds complex. I guess as I'm listening, as I was hearing how you both characterized the process, it seems it seems challenging. Because I've actually encountered these situations where you're talking to a customer and the customer might not know how to answer the question, like, because they don't know anything about the ATO process. And my guidance is maybe we go find the IT department, et cetera. I mean, how do people within the services learn about this, and how would you guide a customer who doesn't know where to go? Maybe Jason, I'll since you were working with Second Front and helping many different entities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I hate to keep going back and stomping my foot on this, but if you're a commercial company, it's your job to go do the background research and identify the organization. So if you're working with the A6 in the Air Force, or you're working with the the J2 and the Joint Staff, or you're working, some program with the Marine Corps, go pull up an org chart and find out who that IT organization is. And you don't have to know the person at the other end. It's better if you do, but you should understand the organization of the place that's paying you, so that you can ask them, hey, who do I go to? And sometimes it takes the prompts, right? Hey, I need to go and understand the ATO process now at the beginning of my project, so when we get to the end, we don't have delays, right? I need to build it to spec first. And an organization I forgot to talk about earlier was NIST. So NIST compliance, NIST creates the standards, most of the standards for DoD and federal government IT and ATO rules. So the vast majority of those regulations may be found at the National Institute for Standards and Technology. But back to the point, you need to be able to direct them and go, I need to go talk to your communications, usually the 6, anything, the Air Force, it's A6, Air 6, the Army, it's G6, the Marine Corps, it's G6 for ground, and for the Navy, it's N6 or N2, N6 that combine 2 different codes, intelligence and communications. But say, hey, I need to talk to your communications people, and they can get you in touch with a person who's close to the problem. And then just like business development, keep working to the person who has the solution that you need.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have broad organizational input. Remember the number 6 and you're good, is what I'm hearing here. I'm going to ask some of these questions that are in the chat. Is it any easier to offer a solution with a web app versus installed software? Or maybe even, I'll modify that, even if you're like in GovCloud, right? AWS GovCloud, if you're deploying within AWS GovCloud, that may or may not, I don't know, if it already has some sort of certification. Is there any faster alternative? Either of you, jump in here.
I've put an answer in chat already.
Oh, okay.
And I'd like to hear Jason's take on it as well. I think in general, web apps are probably going to be easier because those are things that you can control on the server end. It's easier to do code scans if you need to do that, because like you control the source code all the way to the running instantiation. That said, like we do have mission areas where you're going to be disconnected or kind of intermittently connected to the internet, and those are not often solvable with cloud workloads. I know about web browsers and PWAs and stuff, but for the most part, like you may find that you have to do installed apps for that kind of thing. And installed apps can even get you out of some of the cloud-based process barriers. There's FedRAMP is a thing for cloud. FedRAMP's not necessarily a thing for installed or installable FAT clients. That all said, it's for the same reason we have FedRAMP, we also have rules about what clients we install in our NMCI seats and our Navy seats and our Air Force seats, and like those can be barriers as well, and those can be heavy barriers sometimes. And the Navy at least has been pushing for a while to try to move things off of the NMCI desktop computer onto a web-based client. That makes it easier for Navy missions typically, not all. And so there's also a lot of support for that kind of in our processes. But Jason, what's your experience been on that?
I think I keep going back to this. It's more about the human effects because it's a decision that's made than the system itself. And so I would say, while you have people like Commander Pyne who are at the forefront of cloud operations in the DoD, the vast majority of the Department of Defense is 10, 15, even 20 years behind the state of the art. And so if you're looking for a rapid employment of software into the DoD, what the bulk of DoD is good at is deploying onto on-premise systems. A lot of the DoD does not know how to deal with cloud. So if you are working with an organization that knows how to do cloud ops, then it's easy to get a cloud-based application approved. If you're working with an organization that doesn't do cloud apps, and they do on-premise or even like bespoke hardware type applications, then it's easy for them to do it in that manner. And so I would say, again, know your customer. If you can plan your deployment of your software to be agnostic of a cloud-based deployment or an on-premise deployment, using containerization, virtualization options, then you leave yourself the optionality to go and move forward.
If I could, I agree with you there. Absolutely. I was kind of thinking in my mind, like desktop fat clients rather than on-prem containerized things. You're exactly right, though. We do have a lot of data centers that are still out there, still running workloads and still adding workloads. And those have been the norm, still are the norm. And if your application aligns to that kind of model, you've got a real shot about just being something familiar to the DoD customer, so they can just kind of more quickly grab it and go and install it and kind of work from there. So I guess it depends. My answer depends on whether you're talking about installing on a server or installing on a client and an end user seat.
Fascinating.
Let me add one more. There's a difference if you are coming in as a cluster of software applications or coming in as an individual as well, right? The federal government and the DoD likes to batch processes, right? So if you're coming in at everybody and you're meeting the ATO stage with everybody else, then you're going to be able to achieve that in a more scalable way, right? The more bespoke you are, the more unique you are, the more likely you're going to run into some issues with your accreditation or have special requirements onto that accreditation. And it's okay. It just is what it is. And let me counteract myself and say, except bulk processing goes wrong, and this will lead into another conversation. I'll give you an example of when bulk processing has gone wrong and the DoD didn't anticipate it. So AFWorks and the Air Force opened up their SIVR program to an open topic SIVR. It means they didn't publish anything that they were looking for, any sort of guidelines. They sort of said, here's what the Air Force's general is looking for, propose anything to us. And then they came back and they rapidly shortened the ability to award contracts to companies. And they were able to award hundreds, like something like 450 IT-focused contract awards in about the 750 to 1.5 million range. The problem is at the end of all of those, all 450 of those IT projects needed to be accredited to get onto DoD networks. And there's a DoD software factory called Platform One, and the Air Force had been promising that the onboarding service called Party Bus that Platform One had available would be the path of excellence to get all these 400 on there. But Party Bus was staffed with 4 military people, right? They were really good, but they are not 400 companies of varying complexity, varying types of applications good. And so you ended up with this huge backlog. And so one of the problems in the federal government was with scalability. As the demand for accreditation goes up, in order to move these things through, the federal government has to hire new people. And the federal government is pretty much capped in the number of people they can hire. So where are they making trade-offs? And so if you see slowdowns, it might just be that there's too many things in the lane and the DoD can't scale.
Every good idea goes punished. It will be punished. So I did hear about that, but I didn't know the backstory. Didn't understand. Okay, that's interesting. So I'm going to read a question from Marguerite. I've felt the pain of the ATO process as an employee of government as well as of a software company. What is the level of awareness of the U.S. government leadership or congressional level of the need to improve and shorten the ATO process? Is there any light on the horizon? Using 10-year software or not having access to the latest tools does not position us in the right way. I guess maybe another way is what what steps can be improved? Are there efficiencies to be gained?
I'll go first. Throw the bombs so Commander Pyne doesn't have to. And
I
then
appreciate it.
you can clean up. So there are two competing priorities of the federal government right now, right? So the emergence of China and the increase in the amount of cyber threats that are out there and the number of cyber attacks that are going on is a major threat to the U.S. And there is a faction within Congress, within the federal government, that is going after improving the level of security in systems that are on the networks, and also ensuring that industry are improving their security posture as well. Because why would I try to steal the system diagrams of the new fighter jet from the well-defended Department of Defense when I can just steal it from a not so well-defended subcontractor that's out there who hasn't updated their their antivirus in 3 months? It's much easier for me to go after those defense things. So be aware, if you're working in the defense space, and they start publishing your contract awards, you may become one of those targets of nation state espionage. And so Congress and the Department of Defense and the other federal agencies are very aware of this. And so you'll see things like the CMMC, the cyber maturity model, which is setting out guidelines on how companies can increase their security posture and actually making CMMC compliance a prerequisite to do business with the DoD. Now that's not in place right now. And they've come back from their position from like, you have to do this, and you're going to have to pay for certification and maintain certification, to sort of a tiered type approach where smaller companies can self-certify. But that really is a large load on companies. The other pertinent one that you may have heard in the last couple of months is as they're wrangling through the congressional budget, and the defense budget, there is some language that has been thrown around that companies will need to verify that their systems have zero vulnerabilities, no vulnerabilities at all. And so, I'll tell you this much: that is not possible for anybody, not in Amazon, not in Microsoft. However, it's sort of an indication of where that security-minded group is. The other group is we need to increase opportunities for business to do business with the government, and they're creating new pathways to get there. FedRAMP, all of that are ways of onboarding people more efficiently, more rapidly on board. And so you're going to see basically competition between those two opinions. I'm on the opinion of move more stuff through, but that's just me. Over to you, Commander Pyne.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the laydown. There's kind of the mind space people are at is, the threat is only growing more perilous for the U.S. As each day goes by, and I also think there's this is just my take on how I see Congress and some of the senior executives acting, but I think there's this idea that the government has been taken advantage of by shoddy vendors for long enough, and it's really time to get people to clean up their game as far as cybersecurity goes. There's the Beijing hack of like OPM records, and there's a whole bunch of hacks that never make the news, but still happen. And Jason already brought up our blueprints for our critical weapon systems and platforms over the past 10-20 years, just walking their way over to our potential adversaries, and no one's satisfied with that state of affairs. And so I think everyone wants for security to get better for the federal government. And now the question is, what is the best way for government workloads to get better security when we're working with small businesses, when we're working with contractors outside of the government? And there's different ways to approach it. I think Jason and I are a similar mindset that it's better for us to get better at shipping software better, faster, smaller, more agile as we do it, so that there's even if we ship a vulnerability, like you just said, nothing is ever like zero vulnerabilities, right? Like there's always vulnerabilities in any software we buy or any software we write custom code for. So I'm more worried about how do we detect that we shipped vulnerabilities, and then how do we remediate those as fast as we possibly can. We being, either the government or the government contractor team. And that gets after things like, DevOps, what we call DevSecOps, cloud native systems and platforms and that kind of thing. But at the same time, like it's a very large DoD. There's a whole lot of missions that we have where, systems are not going to even know that there is an internet for months at a time. And so like, you can't just say one size fits all for all the stuff that we do. And one thing I left in chat though is there is acknowledgement. I can't speak for Congress, but there is acknowledgement at the kind of the CIO levels of military services and departments that the process as it is not fast enough. We've actually supported some Navy teams as far as trying to get after a concept called Cyber Ready, which is intended to blend cybersecurity more closely into the acquisition system so that we don't spend 2 years acquiring an IT system that may or may not meet our mission and then secure it before we field it, but instead try to move that security more into the acquisition process. And not just that, but move it away from a compliance checklist process into something more like we do for personnel readiness. Like we don't send a ship underway without the right number of crew, without the right training, without the right medical uptime, and all this sort of stuff. And so the idea is like, okay, how can we take that mentality and apply it to our IT systems? Is there a certain threshold at which an IT system is ready enough to touch a DoD network, even if it's not doing sensitive workloads yet? And then we can get it up to, how ready does it need to be for sensitive workloads? And then how ready does it need to be for high uptime and sensitive workloads, and that kind of thing. And the Air Force, have been obviously strong supporters of AFWorks, Platform One, Kessel Run. Like a lot of the famous things you've heard about are probably Air Force things. But even the Army, between Army Futures Command and Army Applications Lab, they're doing a lot of cool stuff trying to get better at this. And so, like, I think from the executive level, they hear it, they understand it, and they agree with you, and they're trying to get better at it. But that doesn't mean they can snap their fingers, then everyone gets it, and we're all going to move faster and not break things in the process. And so they're trying really hard to get the balance of, okay, how do we improve this incrementally so that we're not leaving cybersecurity vulnerabilities out there, but we are trying to make it faster. I don't know if that's a good answer, but they do hear you.
Let me jump on there as well, because what was going on in my mind as you were talking is like, what can companies do to actually like mitigate that, right? To account for that, knowing what's going on. And there is a perverse incentive out in the commercial space that prevents companies from actually investing in security until later on in their programs. And that's really the venture capital model. And so under the venture capital model, you really are in a 12 to 18 month cycle between funding rounds, and you've got a ramp that you have to get up to. So, you get your seed round, you have to prove out your concept, right? Get to, your A round, you have to build out at least a minimum viable product and get your first couple customers, prove that out. A to B, you're scaling, and Owen's going to correct me on this whole venture model thing. But A to B, you're scaling. B, you are scaling massively across multiple market segments, and then C, it goes up. But there is there's an incentive to only do the things that are necessary to ship that product, right? I need to get more customers in my network. I need to get more product out. That's my primary. And so if I'm making a decision on hiring my next full stack software developer or my data scientist versus hiring somebody who knows government ATO to increase my security, or a security engineer, I'm gonna put my money on somebody who builds product every single time, right? And we'll figure out that whole security stuff in the back end. There is a group of companies that are out there that are changing their focus, their startups, Silicon Valley type startups, like Anduril, Palantir is one, SpaceX is another one. There's a bunch of these companies that are building up who are doing it for national security, and some of them are struggling, right? They're struggling because the investment that you need to make as a defense or fairly facing startup to be compliant is really high. And so what you should be looking for is build security in from your system from the beginning, right? Not 6 months into it, we'll just figure this out. Pick a secure environment, pick a secure infrastructure, hire somebody who's got a little bit of security background, have a conversation with the government. I'll give an advertisement for Second Front Systems, right? Second Front Systems, one of the products we built, and actually my one of my UX designers was in here, Taylor, earlier, and we were building that to solve that ATO problem that I talked about. So Second Front Systems has a product called Game Warden, and what it does is it actually has achieved ATO and has achieved a continuous ATO process, which allows you to continuously update your software and maintain your ATO. And they have a DevOps environment. And so you can basically, on the commercial side, bring your software into an inherently compliant environment, develop your software, and take advantage of the continuous ATO process to get your security checking, to create your security artifacts, and move you into a government environment. It takes the typical 18 to 24 month ATO process. Yeah, 18 to 24 months. And $750,000 to $1.5 million, and takes it down to a couple $100,000, and about 3 to 6 months. That scales in the commercial side, and you'll see other companies that are coming out that are doing the business to business sale to assist you with CMMC compliance, to assist you with navigating the ATO process. Like, these are service-oriented companies that you might look at as your smaller company, maybe not hiring in that capability yourself, but going and finding other companies that are out there that provide this, much in the same way as you get a lawyer or a fractional CFO, or you can find creative ways of doing this. And I guess that's my advice to you. Go build inherently secure from the beginning. If you are in the government space, be in the government space and build for government systems and build for security. Because like I said, that ATO, that's your ticket. If you don't get that, everything else that you did doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Jason. I feel like it's 2022 and security still can be an afterthought. I can say that at the large company, public company board levels, there's SECs actually thinking of, it's kind of odd, mandating that one of the board members has cybersecurity background because of so many breaches taking place. And the only concern the industry has is that most cybersecurity professionals aren't really from the business perspective, right? They come at it from a technical perspective, which sometimes there's a business language barrier at times. So when you started talking about designing it, and that's what I was thinking, was like, is there a way to pre-think this so that as you're building your system, you're thinking security first, maybe not security first, and thinking with security in mind. And it's a great idea to have companies that have been there before offering on-ramps, using products like what you said Second Front provides. I'm going to wrap this session with one last question, unless others post questions in the chat. But Peter Pad, I actually work with him right now. He has an AI-oriented company. So his question is, how does this work with an AI ML-based company that works with continuous data from the DoD customer?
Good, Mike.
Thanks. Yeah, I think big thing is there's some of the things we haven't talked about quite yet is I think there's a lot more focus on DoD cybersecurity policy on things like identity and trust relationships between systems than you may be used to seeing kind of out in Silicon Valley, at least for like early stage startups. And sometimes that's inverted, right? Like, there are startups that are like really good with infrastructure as code and automation everywhere, and they can do things as far as, least privilege types of systems that would impress even, the stringiest DoD customer. But for the most part, I think DoD, there's a lot of arguments out there about mutual TLS or macaroons and stuff like that. And DoD's like, they've been in PKI 15 years ago, right? So like trust is very important. Identity is very important for DoD systems. And so, wrapping that back around this question, I would say is like, okay, the DoD customer is going to want to know, where is my data coming from? How sensitive is this data? Is this like, national security system kind of data, or is this, just kind of innocuous, security cameras out in public kind of data? And then how is that data being secured as it's moving to, the startup's cloud infrastructure? What vendors is the startup using, right? Because, there's some famous Silicon Valley companies, that are in the security space who had some of their customer data get leaked through a third-party vendor, right? So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that always seems to come up when I was working with, startups in my last job was, hey, these are really onerous requirements, but, every so often you get a news story like that only reinforces why the requirement is there in the first place. It's like, who are your third-party vendors? What access do they have to your systems, and how can you prove that they don't have access to other parts of your systems? And a lot of it's just going to be like, okay, are you, if you're running your own computers, where are those computers at? Like, do you have security guards? Are they U.S. citizen security guards? Your programmers, are they U.S. citizens or not? And, a lot of questions that, frankly, like don't even make sense in the Silicon Valley normal type of startup. Where that's not necessarily the first question on a lot of founders' minds. I mean, we get a lot of founders who are immigrants themselves, right? But that is the kind of thing that DoD customers can sometimes have to be worried about is, who are your developers? Who are your operators? If they're different from your developers, what's the security of the data center? What's the security of the source code you're using? And so, like, I haven't talked about SBOM yet, and probably won't have time to here, but like those are the other kinds of things that are coming down here. But that all said, it's like, if you can show in the paperwork that, yes, we treat security seriously, we treat our computing infrastructure seriously, we treat seriously how we handle data and store it, both in transit and at rest. You'll find agreeable DoD mission owners to be your customers because they're just focused on the mission. And, if they can offload the processing to you, if they can offload the handling of data, they're happy as well. It's just they want it to be the right provider.
Yeah, I'll add some more nuance to it. So DoD actually has some really really good ways of dealing with data that are policy methods. So the security classifications, which we really didn't talk about this, there's multiple different security domains that go from controlled unclassified information, which are things like social security numbers, healthcare information. There's like 257 categories of that across the federal space. There's even like a CUI lookup.
Really? No one knows what CUI is.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
All unclassified information. It used to be called FOUO for official use only, but they've updated that program. And then you have confidential, secret, top secret, and then top secret compartmented and special access programs. All of those computer systems are actually isolated from each other, even within the same domain. Like, two different top secret systems could be isolated from each other. And generally, it is not a problem ingesting data into a system at different security classification levels. They have these things called cross-domain solutions, and they will suck the data up. But things don't go back down. Data does not flow downhill. So as long as you're consuming data and then providing the processed outputs into the same domain, you're probably okay. The other thing is there are some organizations in the DoD that do process massive amounts of data and will not have any problem at all understanding the problem space you're in, right? Think about the National Reconnaissance Office, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Those types of organizations process data that would baffle your mind and are able to actually move it around, and they're using artificial intelligence, machine learning to do that as well. So I'd say the processes are in place, and I'm going to go back to my first answer. That is always the answer: know your customer. Who are they? Are part of your due diligence process for going into a contract negotiation was, do I reasonably expect that this customer will be able to support me on the back end after I get a contract? I'll answer the foreign question too, real quick. In general, you're adding complexity if you are a foreign-based company. There's a difference. There's different tiers of foreign-based companies. The top tier, the easiest, are your Five Eyes, which are UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. There is what we call the Six Eyes, but they are partner nations such as Korea, Japan, Norway, that are really, really close U.S. allies. And then there's these what we call third party. Those are all the other countries. And then there are countries that you will not have any chance whatsoever if your company is based there. Places like North Korea, Iran, Russia, not China. There's plenty of Chinese systems operating. Pakistan, and there's actually legal basis to prevent you from going and do that. But generally what companies do is once they reach a certain amount of interest in the United States is they will stand up a US based subsidiary. And if they are working on a classified network, they will actually section off that portion of the company, hire only US nationals, and the US nationals will work on that. You've got several UK companies that have a wholly owned subsidiary in the US that are just completely run US personnel, and they might have one British person who's like your manager that reports to the top head shed, but he's not allowed to see any of the work they're doing. Does that help?
Hopefully for some of the folks.
Good rundown on that question. And I did have in the chat, some of the challenges we ran into, because I came from Navy HR, where a lot of our data is CUI, but you could at least make a plausible argument that a lot of our data is just stuff that sailors would put on Facebook anyways, and therefore, at a lower category, what we call IL2 in the DoD. And so we did a lot of work to push for usage of cloud services that would not normally be enabled for DoD workloads. For basic HR records, for simple HR workloads, like, hey, how can I see how much vacation time I have, or how can I request to take some days off, that kind of thing. And a lot of the challenges we had were really just around cloud service providers' use of foreign-born personnel, because they already had US citizens for their government clouds, but we were trying to operate in the actual cloud, the actual commercial public cloud. And that was, a lot of some of our barriers that we're running into was hey, I mean, the rules say right here, right? Anyone using or anyone able to touch, influence, access, finagle with, et cetera, government data, we just don't want to have to worry about dual loyalties. We don't have to worry about insider threat. And not that American citizens get rid of insider threat by any stretch of the imagination, Snowden, for example, but it's just, we have to set the line somewhere, and that's where we've set the line is US nationals on US defense information. And so, we were able to get around some of those things, a surprising number of those things, but, it was still a lot of debating that we had to do.
If you're looking at CFIUS and things like that, and you're looking at doing business with the government, I would also look at your board makeup. Ensuring that your board is representative of the company that you want to be. There are several companies that have been derailed by taking, and also your investment, by taking direct, CCP, Chinese Communist Party money, and then placing a controlling interest member on the board, which basically puts your company under the control of a foreign government and potentially be able to influence your actions. The DoD does do their due diligence on companies, and when they find that, they may ask you to rectify that. I've seen some companies have removed board members in order to get a lucrative contract, but the better solution is not put yourself in that situation to begin with.
Mm-hmm. So with the balance of the time, I'm going to spend some time just wrapping it up. So Donna, do you want to tell us what's going to happen with the recording and where we're going to post it and when?
Yes, so after this meeting, we will make sure that the recording goes up on YouTube on our BM H4X Labs YouTube page. We'll send out the links to everyone here and everyone who RSVP'd, so you guys have that link, but it will be available to watch on YouTube after this.
Thank you. And then Jason and Mike, I don't know if you're willing, if you want, share your LinkedIn or something in chat, and people can connect with you there however you want to share. No pressure, you don't have to. And then for everybody else, we'd love it if you connect with us and give us some ideas around other topics that you might want to hear about, so that we can continue to service the community here. I guess any last minute house cleaning issues? Some folks are actually posting their information in the chat, so we'll be able to share the chat around. So yeah, so everyone, if you want to share your information with everybody, please feel free to. And with that, Jason, thank you so very much. I know it's late where you are, and
I'm in Alabama right now.
oh, you are? I thought you might be in like Europe or something.
That's next week.
That's next week, yeah. But again, thank you so much. This was great. Very, very informative. Demystify things, security first, design it in up front, just like everything else. Think about your systems requirements, and that probably takes care of a lot of other issues. So thanks so much. We'll talk to everyone soon. Take care.